right here in our work at Versiti. So with that, Becky, I'll let you take it over and I will mute my video.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you all for having me here today. I'm super excited to be here and share my story with you. Michelle, do you want to go to the next slide? Hello. Oh. Uh, So what I'm going to do today is I am going to give you a little background on my story, my personal life, and how it applies to the work that I do currently to advance disability inclusion in the workplace. My name is Becky Curran Kekula. I am a person with dwarfism, meaning that I stand 4 feet tall as an adult. I was born into a family where dwarfism was not in the history of the family, which is the case for 80% of people with dwarfism. They're born into families with siblings and parents who are average height. When I was first born, my parents really didn't know what it meant to have a child with dwarfism. This was back in 1984, before there was a lot of research and internet available for them to learn more about what it meant. And when I was delivered at the hospital, there was a nurse on staff who actually had seen a little person be delivered in that same hospital before, and my parents were able to get a little bit of information from her, but they still needed to search for more answers. And I know a lot of you are working tirelessly in the healthcare medical field, and you're trying very hard to meet the needs of your patients. And I want to continue to share my story of my upbringing and also integrate some of those experiences I've had when it came to healthcare. So, a few days after I was born, my average height parents were super excited to bring me home to meet my sister, who's also average height. And they decided to make an appointment at a hospital where there was a geneticist so they could try to get some of the answers that they just couldn't find in newspapers and brochures at that point in time. They ended up showing up to the hospital where the geneticist worked, and they were told that they needed to follow the signs down the hallway that say birth defects. Then they need to go in the elevator and go to the floor that says birth defects, and then follow the hallway to the signs that say birth defects. And they'll meet with the geneticist after they see a few more of those signs that say birth defects. That was startling to them to see the word birth defects that many times in a hospital, and they were really feeling uneasy when they finally got to that geneticist who was supposed to give them some guidance on what it meant to be a parent of someone with a physical disability. They, I don't know if they really had that much that they learned during that experience, except for they learned that those signs needed to be changed. They sent a letter to the hospital and got those signs changed to genetics. I think a lot of times people are dancing around the word and afraid to just call it what it is. They were going to meet a geneticist, not a birth defects doctor. But that was the beginning to my parents becoming advocates for people like me and making sure that there was a brighter future for us. My parents then continued to be a resource in our local town in Massachusetts, where if someone at a local hospital would have a child with dwarfism, my parents would take the phone calls and try to talk to those new parents. There were some parents that called and said, "We don't want to take it home." There's this common perception, because there are only 30,000 people with dwarfism in the United States, there's a common perception that we're less than, or we are historically misrepresented in the media as fictional characters or creatures. And there hasn't been enough authenticity in the way that we're represented. So people who find out that dwarfism is going to be a part of their life act scared and fearful. And my parents would continue to try to change how those people felt in order to then hopefully welcome their child with dwarfism into their home, even though it was going to be a different experience than maybe one they would expect. About 6 months after I was born, my parents were able to find a specialist in Baltimore, Maryland. He specifically treated patients with dwarfism. Treated meaning he cared for, as a medical practitioner who dedicated his life to dwarfism. We ended up signing up for a sleep study that I participated in at 6 months because that was what allowed us to get the appointment in this doctor's office. He was in high demand. His office was completely full when my parents got to Baltimore, but he saw the ghostly look on my parents' face because they still didn't have the answers that they were looking for. And I think it was at that point where they found out that they didn't always need to have the answers, but they just needed to continue to try their best and do their best to raise me in the way that they were planning to raise my sister, who doesn't appear to have any physical differences, but still wants that same amount of nurturing. After I did the sleep study, my parents were in the waiting room of the doctor's office. He saw how ghostly white they looked because they were just so nervous. And he ended up bringing them into his office and asked them to just lay it out there, everything that's on their mind. And it was after that appointment where he put them at ease. Didn't have every single answer in the book, but at least gave them hope to what it would mean to be a parent of someone with dwarfism. After that, we would go every 6 months to a year down to Baltimore, Maryland from Massachusetts. We would expect to wait up to 8 hours for appointments because this doctor was in such demand, but because of that first meeting and how much time he spent with my parents with the full waiting room, it was worth it, and it was okay to sit and wait for as long as we needed to get the best care possible. And what that led to was a few medical complications that I had growing up, included my first night on the earth. I had some breathing trouble. The doctors didn't think I was going to make it through the night. Then, before I was 3 years old, I ended up having a brace that I wore around just to keep my body aligned. The type of dwarfism I have is one of 400 types, but it's the most common. It's called achondroplasia. And we have very average looking torso and shorter arms and legs, but our organs are more compact. So our spinal column is up very close to our spinal cord, and some of this alignment at an early age needed to be looked at closely. So I wore a back brace. Then I had bowed legs, and I ended up having bone taken out of my legs when I was 3 years old to straighten them. And then when I was 13 years old, I had bone taken out of my pelvis and put back in my legs. Then in 10th grade, right before I was going into 10th grade, I was sailing. I grew up participating in sports, sailing, soccer, skiing, swimming, all alongside my average height peers. And I was wearing a wetsuit, and I thought that I was just wearing a wetsuit that was too tight for me. But it was the beginning of the really bad spinal cord compression where I ended up losing my ability to walk, and I had to take 29 days off of school. And then I ended up having 7 pieces of my lower vertebrae removed to release the spinal cord compression. And fortunately, it's been 21 years now, and I haven't had a surgery since, so it was a successful surgery, but it really is a reminder. I think a lot of people look at me and they say, "Oh, you don't have a disability," but I don't usually go into my stories of, "Oh, I had all these surgical procedures," because I don't want people to feel bad for me. And one of the biggest struggles during that point in my life was missing 29 days of school. I did not wanna be kept back. I wanted to be able to keep up with my average height peers. And I did have a friend who was in my class from preschool to 7th grade, and that prevented any potential bullying. So it was after the surgery and after I had missed those 29 days of school, as I was trying to get back on track, where I started experiencing a bit of isolation. My friends, they started dating, and we all had a really close knit and close relationship up until that point. People were super supportive during my surgeries. But then once they started dating, they left me out because they didn't think that I could be around guys. And it was one of those moments where I just started thinking, it's not fun being different. And I didn't want to be left at home every night with my parents because they weren't seeming like cool people to hang out with during the high school years. But looking back, I wish I did. I wish I took advantage of doing whatever and just having activity to do whether or not people were inviting me places. But it was one of those times where I thought, okay, maybe it would be nice to find people who have similar lived experiences to me. And it took me a few years. It was actually after my first year in college where I attended my first Little People of America conference. And I learned that there were a lot of people who had similar lived experiences to me. And we were able to share our hospital experiences growing up and just all of the adaptations that we've had to make to a life that is not made for us. And that includes drawing blood. I am always struggling to try to figure out where you can see the veins, but because I do have a average height torso, shorter arms and legs, there is kind of enough skin to be a foot taller. I wouldn't choose to be a foot taller, but it makes it a little more challenging to find the veins to draw blood, which is still very important for us to do. But during the college years, I really felt that I learned about myself and how to be an independent person. One of the reasons I chose to go to the college where I attended was because there was a little person in the cafeteria when I was going on tour there. This was Providence College in Rhode Island. It's a basketball rival of Marquette. And I felt that because there was one little person in the environment, the school would be at least aware of someone like me transitioning into that school. It ended up being a great experience. I struggled a little bit my freshman year when I was getting ready to go to school. My freshman year roommate, who I got along with really well on the phone, did not know that I was a little person because I didn't think that I needed to tell her. And this was before Facebook and LinkedIn and other social media. And once we did meet, even though we got along really well on the phone, she was surprised. And it took about 6 months to convince her that I wasn't going to jump out and scare her and that I was just working on figuring out how to be independent and how to pursue a college education just like she was. But then I ended up meeting someone who became my best friend and is still my best friend to this day. And one of the reasons we became really close was because she was offering me constructive feedback in everyday life, where up until that point, I just don't think enough people gave me the feedback I needed to learn and grow. And that definitely translates to the work environment. Right after I graduated college with a marketing degree, I did have several internship experiences. I've transitioned from the East Coast to the West Coast to work for a talent manager in Los Angeles because I really wanted to work behind the scenes in the entertainment industry in order to change how people like me are portrayed in the media because that affects how people like me are treated in society. And the person who offered to hire me was also a little person. So again, didn't have to explain myself. And I was ready going out there ready to work. My parents told me you need a job and a place to live and we'll support your endeavor. After I secured the job, the place to live, they flew me out to California and they helped me get settled. And once I got to California, the job fell through. I've yet to meet the lady to this day, but it lit a fire under me to figure out how I could stay there. And I ended up sending out 1,000 resumes. I went on 100 interviews and I went through 3 temporary job assignments before finally landing permanent employment. And the permanent employment came after 7 months as a temporary employee. And I say this because people shouldn't have to face these challenges, and when I went on those 100 interviews, it was clear that I was qualified to get the interviews. And again, I was not getting the constructive feedback I needed. It was 100 interviews over the course of 4 months. And during each and every one of those interviews, people failed to tell me what I did wrong or why they weren't hiring me. And I was left to assume It's never good to assume, but I was left to assume that the reason they didn't hire me was because of my short stature, because they were fearful. There were many times where people were shaking in the room, and it just made me so upset because I was not learning after each of those interviews. And why temporary employment became the preferred route to go was that I was able to go to recruiters. They could then pitch me to just show up at jobs. So I did a month working in marketing at the Hallmark Channel, and then I did a month working at a trailer park agency, which it's called Trailer Park, but they make trailers for movies. And then I started at a big entertainment and sports talent agency that actually was in the Hispanic marketing department when I first transitioned into the role. And one of the reasons that I felt that I was supported and protected in that role was because someone who was my supervisor, the agent who I reported to, worked in the diversity space. And she heard my story about how many interviews I had gone through up until that point, and she believed in me. And it took up until that point to find someone to mentor and show me the way so I could continue to work. One of the negative things about that position was, or my lack of preparation for that position, was that it was in Hispanic marketing, and I took 5 years of French in high school. So that didn't go over well at that point in time, but I was able to learn. I was able to learn the practicality of working for a talent agency in a big town. And then I switched over when the position became available. I was in entertainment marketing, and that became more desirable because it didn't require me to learn a second language, and I was able to figure out how to connect brands like Harley Davidson with celebrity influencers. So what we would do was we would look at magazines and figure out which celebrities are riding a motorcycle. If they're not riding a Harley Davidson, let's figure out how we can get them to ride one. So we'll send them one and hope that they use it and then are photographed in future magazines. Or there would be moments in movie scripts where it wouldn't just be like product placement, it would be product integration. So instead of saying, oh, we're going to just have someone drink a Coke in a movie, we're going to have them talk about how delicious that Coca-Cola is. Or award shows, having big sponsors be part of award shows. And just through this experience, I learned how much influence the entertainment industry has on society and brands and the world. And it took me until 4 years of working at the talent agency to express why I was passionate about working in that industry. And people started coming to me and they asked, what is it you're passionate about? Because the truth was that I did not want to become a talent agent, but I appreciated being in an environment that was a well-oiled machine. And when people started asking me what I was passionate about, I told them that I was passionate about changing how people like me are portrayed in society, but I wanted to be able to prove that I was a passionate worker and a good contribution to the organization before expressing that. And they tried to figure out the best way to support me, and what I did was I put together a panel discussion of actors and people who are creators, who are writers, directors, producers, who all happen to have disabilities, and they came together for a conversation to say, "It's time to change how all of us are portrayed in the media." And we continue to figure out how we can get more positive representation. Fast forward to kind of where we are now with those statistics, people are getting more exposure, people with talent who also happen to have disabilities, but there are still so many people who are playing people with disabilities in fictional TV shows and movies, and they're also getting awarded for their performance of portraying disability, which is a little crazy. But I continue to try to change that. and how people like me are portrayed and all disabilities. I think even what I was saying earlier about people will tell me, oh, you don't have a disability, but I'm not afraid of the word disability. And it's a great community to be a part of because we're problem solvers. We're able to get out of bed every day and figure out how to adapt to this world that was not made for us. And those are skills that can translate to the workplace. After I worked at the talent agency, I decided to work in television casting. I was offered a job from the point of where I when I worked at the talent agency to where I am now. All of the jobs that I got were related to networking, so there were no surprises. And even when it came to finding apartments after that point in time with strangers, sometimes just trying to figure out where there are rooms available, I made sure in introductory emails that I made it known that I was a little person because I did not want there to be any surprises. So same with these jobs. When I transitioned to work at the television studio in casting, what we would do is we would have to approve every speaking role on all CBS shows. And I would try to figure out how we can integrate more actors with disabilities into those roles. Even if it says doctor, why can't it be a doctor who happens to have a disability? Thinking outside of the box. Or why can't it be a little person? It could add so much more depth and character to the script. And it could be something that people could learn from in a positive way. I did that for about a year and I got frustrated because the work that I was trying to do just continued to get turned down because the industry just wasn't ready. They weren't ready to take a chance on hiring someone with a disability, thinking that it was a liability, even though the storyline may include disability. And I moved back to Boston, even though it was a very hard decision. I went through a stage where I could say that it was very close to being depressed, and I didn't really know what it meant for my future. While I was living in Los Angeles right before I left, I had a roommate who was also a little person, and he was diagnosed with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and he needed to go back to Georgia where his family was so they could take care of him. And I decided that I needed to go back home because I had left the job that I was in, and I really couldn't imagine trying to find another roommate like him. And it's going back to the drawing board of trying to explain to someone that I'm a little person and that I'm not gonna scare them, and I keep saying this because we continue to be portrayed in this way, and that's sometimes people's only assumption. And when I moved back to Boston, one of the things that gave me hope was my sister told me that she is a middle school teacher, and at that point, she was teaching creative writing. She said to me, "I want you to come to my class and tell them your story." And during that time, I tried to find some old pictures from growing up, and I did a bunch of research through interviewing my parents and other people who've been a big part of my life to really dig deeper into some of my experiences when I was younger, to add that to my storytelling. And one of the things I found was a junior statement that I wrote to apply to colleges. It said that I always wanted to be a part-time motivational speaker. And I thought, okay, this sounds exciting, and I'm going to figure out how to pursue it. But are people going to want to listen to me? Because I got to this point in my career out in California, and I was still only in the role of an assistant. Do people really want to hear my story? But I learned that my sister had been talking about me so much to her students. They were excited to meet me. I was able to share my experience growing up participating in sports, doing different activities that they do to quote unquote normalize the experience where people may go fearful, they or start off as fearful, point, stare, laugh, but then they get excited because they realize we have more in common than maybe they thought when I first walked into the room. And I continued to figure out how do I share my story as many places as possible. And one of the places where it ended up really uh, hitting me as to why work was so important was that there were parents like my parents in the position that my parents were in when I was born, and as parents of people in middle school who were finding out that their children were struggling to transition from elementary to middle school or middle school to high school because they were going to continue to meet new people. And I was fortunate to have that friend who was in my class from preschool to seventh grade. Also, the doctor we went to when I was growing up said, try to keep Becky in the same school system if you can control it. But the reality is, not all families can control that because sometimes one parent is hired for a job that may be in a different city or state, or even people in their own towns are finding out that they're going to be in a new school with new people and they're shifted into different classrooms without realizing it. So what I do is I talk to the administrators, tell them the accommodation requests I had growing up, which included a step stool at my desk. I had a step stool that was in the bathroom that all of the people in the school would use, except for that stall people were not supposed to use, but they got so excited and we realized that the step stool became helpful to more people than we think. And then I had a bathroom pass, which allowed me to go to the bathroom because in most classrooms, they don't allow you to go to the bathroom if someone else is in the bathroom. But because of my smaller stature, I also have a smaller bladder. So I would have that pass. And then sometimes I would have extra books in my classroom so I wouldn't put strain on my back while I was carrying my backpack. And there was a railing in my elementary school that was a second railing, a lower railing, so I could get from the first floor to the second floor. But other than that, they still felt like very subtle adjustments. And then I tell that and then I say, this person may want all of those accommodations I had. They may want none of those accommodations. And it's also very common for people with disabilities to have an IEP or 504 plan, which is related to accommodations just for tests and other things that they may need. But there's often confusion because people look at people with dwarfism and they think, oh, because they're small in stature, they also may not be able to keep up in the classroom. And there have been some families where their children are in a special needs school, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's an important way of education for certain people, but they were missing out on that mainstream experience that would have been keeping their brain going. So in some scenarios, I've been able to help with that transition. And then in 2013, I was actually asked to go speak in Kenya. I helped launch a Little People organization in Kenya. One of the reasons I was asked to go do that was because they were trying to come to America for this sporting event called the World Dwarf Games. It's very similar to the Paralympics. It happens every 4 years in a different country, but it's specific for people with dwarfism. And when I was trying to figure out like why they weren't able to come to the States, they said that they needed to form a formal organization in Kenya. So then the people who were looking after them in Kenya could support them leaving the country to go participate in activities like this. It was kind of the liability. And they had the senator of Nairobi, who was the patron of the organization that they were launching. So very close to the highest point in government. And they put together an event where 500 people came together and shared their excitement for dancing. A lot of people with dwarfism, especially in third world countries, are hidden because new parents just don't feel comfortable sharing their children with the world, whether it is they're afraid they're going to fall down or get made fun of, or they're just feeling ashamed as well. And this was an opportunity to bring people out and share their excitement. And what I did learn there is that people in Kenya or Africa as a whole are usually assigned to a doctor in their village, and you don't really have flexibility like I did to go to my doctor down in Baltimore. And there are a lot of people who unfortunately end up passing away from surgeries that go wrong because there just aren't specialists. And they continue to try to get some specialists from the States to go down there, but unfortunately, the model just isn't sustainable because these people are going to still need to go to the doctor in their villages. And it's just continuing to try to share that there's still hope within a community that seems like everything's going wrong. That experience just made me think how grateful I am for the life that I have, but made me want to pour out my love and support to help those who didn't have the experiences that I had growing up. And after I went to Kenya, I ended up moving from Boston to New York City to work for the Actors Union, where I tried to continue to help change what we see in the media, representing all of the underrepresented groups, trying to get them more visibility, authentic portrayals in all areas of entertainment and news media. I did that for 3.5 years. And in this slide, it talks about one promotion. One of the challenges in the jobs I had after working at the talent agency, after saying that I didn't want to be a talent agent, was that I was not promoted. And that happened actually at the Actors Union while I was working there. I was in a coordinator position and I was not promoted after the 3 years, even though I worked really hard and thought I deserved that promotion. My boss advocated for me, and the people above him did not feel the same way and did not want to support that wish. And I was then approached by an organization that helps corporate America with disability inclusion. And that really helped me figure out where there are people who are passionate and wanting to do this work. They just want to know how. And corporate America is trying very hard to continue to get people to come out, self identify, and give people the accommodations they need to be successful in the job. And I think now more than ever, we're learning that everyone wants others to be successful, and we want to be able to support each other. And one of the best ways to do that is just ask the question. Ask someone, how can I support you through every process of the point of contact at the beginning when someone's applying for the job to helping them, supporting them, allowing them to move up the ladder if they prove that they're capable of doing it. And what we do is we remind people, put it out there that you're willing to make an accommodation from the job application process to the interview setup to onboarding to making sure that people know that they qualify for retention and advancement programs, and give them the constructive feedback they need so they can learn and grow at your company, or you can support them on their next endeavor. And I think one of the biggest struggles is that not enough people at a higher level come out and admit that they're part of the disability community, even though 75% of disabilities are invisible, meaning even people in this virtual room may have a disability. And under the Americans with Disabilities Act, disability is defined as a life event or a mental or physical impairment that affect one or more of life's major events. And it doesn't always list out every single type of disability, but if you have different accommodations you may need in everyday life, you may well qualify as having a disability, and it's not a bad thing. It is a way of life, and it's okay. And what I appreciate about having a physical difference is that people come to me and say, "You have a physical difference. I'm going to share my invisible story. I haven't shared this with anyone else, but I'm going to share with you because I know that you faced adversity." And I appreciate when people share their stories with me, and I love learning from others. But I always hope that they're gonna share that story with others, because it's part of what makes them unique and makes us all unique. You wanna share your story and also understand that if you have an experience that seems daunting to you, it's a daunting experience. People often come to me and say, "Oh, I had this thing happen to me, but it wasn't as bad as what's happened to you in your everyday life." And I think, "Wait a minute. I feel that I'm equipped in a certain way to face the challenges that I've faced in my life, and you're equipped to face the challenges that you do in your life. It doesn't make me more than or less than. We're all human, and we share that human experience." And I want people to continue to know that others want to hear from you. They want to hear your story. And don't be afraid to be curious. If you guys have seen someone like me in the past, or have not seen someone like me in the past, or next time you see someone with a physical disability or any type of disability, ask questions. First, you can refer to someone by their name, and then ask them questions and just figure out what it is that you have in common. I went to an unconscious bias workshop one time, and they told us in one of the exercises to go up to someone who looks nothing like us and find 3 things we don't have in common. And that exercise was a lot harder than one may think. You could be a little bit specific and say, do you have siblings? Okay, how many siblings do you have? But if you stop at do you have siblings and both people have siblings, that one won't count. And then you just continue to find things that you have in common, even though the person may look nothing like you. And I know there's a lot of talk about just the importance of intersectionality, and that's why we do have to band together and understand that all areas of diversity face similar experiences, even if they're not the same experience. We continue to see those workplaces who are focusing on diversity and inclusion are thinking about race and ethnicity, or race, ethnicity, gender, LGBT, but disability kind of falls off, and it's not always included, and we need to make sure that it's intentionally included so the 1 billion people in the world with a disability don't feel left behind. I'm just going to quickly kind of go through the next 2 slides that I have just for some basic information before we go to Q&A. But this year, we celebrated the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. We continue to celebrate it this year. It was a civil rights legislation that gave people with disabilities protection in employment, public services, public accommodations, telecommunications, and so much more. And it protects people like me. During that experience where I was having all those job interviews, if someone said something, they would have been violating the law, but because they were shaking and not verbal about it, it still felt like they were violating the law, but I had no way to prove it. And I am also not one of those people that goes after people for lawsuits because I don't think that's a way to learn. But I think that this act definitely protected me to allow me to get in the room with people to at least have that chance to interview. And it helps with banks have lower ATMs now because of the ADA, allows me to have a more positive banking experience. And then pedal extensions are used for driving. It's also important for people like me to obtain a handicap placard for driving because in most parking lots, people cannot see me. And it's important for me to park close up to where I'm going to be safe. Next slide. Just going to kind of give a few takeaways. It's important for you to think about how you experienced disability in the past. Reflect quickly, but more so think about how you can be better approaching disability in the future. If you do these things, I promise you'll be better than yesterday. Think about how you engage with people with disabilities. Think about how you are engaging with all people. Just reach out and do better and treat everyone the way that you would want to be treated in return. Use disability etiquette resources. I serve on the board of the National Center for Disability Journalism at Arizona State University. They have a wonderful style guide, so it helps you stay informed about the terminology, but at the end of the day, just refer to someone by their name. And once you build a relationship, you can learn a little bit more. Lean on companies, even in the local area in Wisconsin, Milwaukee. There are a lot of great companies like Manpower and Freightert and Northwestern Mutual doing work in this space to advance disability inclusion. And there are benchmarking tools out there to see how you're doing. Make sure disability is included in your diversity and inclusion statement. Make sure that you're having online tools that are accessible for people who may be blind or have low vision. Make sure that you're not putting any barriers up to employment for people with disabilities. At least give them that chance to have that interview experience. And just be kind. And I feel, to go with today's theme, I know that I belong and you belong too. So now we have some chat questions.
Yes, Becky, before we get into the chat, I wish I could ask you billion questions, but I will give the floor over to people that have submitted questions. So first we just had Tani saying you're a great storyteller. Thank you. And then LaDonna had a question around the announcement around the Academy Award for Best Picture and will require films that must meet new inclusion requirements in order to qualify for a nomination. Do you know anything about that or any?
Yes, and so that does include diversity, and they did say that disability is included in that. I'm still not sure how much that will be taken into account, but I hope it is.
Yeah.
Right now, the current statistics are that about 3% of roles in Hollywood have a storyline related to disability, but only like 15% of that 3% is someone with a disability playing that role.
Got it.
So they may still include those inauthentic stories, but it's definitely progress because I know the community is really excited about that announcement.
Awesome. All right. And then the next question is around your stance on the word special needs. The statement is I'm a mother of a 5-year-old with special needs, Down syndrome, and I have been saying special needs for years. I recently heard others saying that they prefer differently abled or unique needs. Would love to hear your take.
Yes, that's a great question. I am not thrilled with the word special needs because of I think it's probably just my lived experience as someone with dwarfism, and people assume that because of my short stature, I must have a cognitive disability. But by no means do I want to go backwards in advocacy for any part of the disability community. So that means everyone. So it's that challenge that I continue to face because everyone belongs, but sometimes you have to advocate a little bit differently. But I would say, in order to make it more cohesive, maybe we continue to just categorize everyone in the category of people with disabilities, if possible. But I also know just there's a lot of work in that space and advocating. And thank you for sharing your story about your daughter. And I don't think anyone's in the wrong for using that terminology. I think it's just trying to navigate how each person, based on their lived experience, feels about it.
Yeah.
And I know even when I said, like, the special education class, like, that's still what it's called, so sometimes you can't really avoid that terminology if that's how it's currently called.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Next question is, there have been quite a few recent reality shows with little people. What are your thoughts on those? Are those helpful or harmful?
Ah, yes, so I would say Little People, Big World has been around for a really long time on TLC. And there was one time I was in Boston just at a coffee shop, and this family from Toronto came up to me and they said, "Oh my gosh, we knew nothing about your community, and we've learned so many great things about dwarfism through this show." And that was one of those moments where I was like, people didn't know much about us, and this show has brought awareness. I do think the show has gone on a little too long, and then they ran out of things to talk about, and there was drama that ensued and other things. But it's still, I think TLC does a pretty good job with making sure that it's still close to the authentic stories. But there are other shows on Lifetime that I think some people may also be referring to. And those frustrate me because they're trying so hard, the producers are trying so hard to create a show that's dramatic, that people will be entertained by. And there's even commercials set up when you watch it on demand for Viagra. Like, it feeds into like the reality that people have fetishes, and it's just a domino effect of not the greatest portrayal. And then they try to have educational moments of like, oh, we experienced this, but it's mixed in. And I think the difference between that and like someone watching Real Housewives is that in the average height world, there are so many people, so no one's going to think that every average height person is the same person. But for us, like, I've been chased in New York City, oh, you're that crazy girl on that show. And it gets a little frustrating, especially when I'm trying to do this work of putting us in a positive light, if that makes sense. But I think like Peter Dinklage and all of the fictional roles he's been able to play as a talented actor has really helped us, because people just look at him as a talented actor rather than saying that he's a fictional dwarf that we want to laugh at.
Yeah, thank you. And if anyone wants to ask a question live, I haven't been able to figure out how to put you all on video. So just let me know. Just raise your hand and I'll put you on video. Another question is, what is the best advice your parents gave you? What is the best advice you gave your parents?
One of the things that comes up a lot, especially in these times, is just mental health and trying to wrap our heads around it. And especially in everyday life, when people come up to me and remind me that I'm different, especially if I'm in a heavily populated city and I see multiple people a day. My dad always tells me, like, you were born this way for a reason. You can have a bad day today, but get up tomorrow and try
Mm,
to do better. And it really does allow me to get out of my funk within a 24-hour period versus letting it linger for days on end. And I think that has been really helpful, because I just realized how many people rely on the positive energy and how many people I can help if I stay in a good mindset. And then for me teaching them, I think it's just reminding them of all the great things that they did to raise me the way that they did, even though there were always going to be naysayers. When I went out to California, there were people who told my parents, like, how could you let her do that? And they thought, why wouldn't we let her do that? Or like, you're really going to go do that or go support her with that? And if they didn't, I think there would be a lot of resentment.
mhm.
And I'm just thankful that they did the best, even though they didn't always have all the information they needed to make informed decisions.
Thank you. The next question is, as we look back on the impact of the pandemic on our daily lives, what recommendations do you have for employers making quick decisions while ensuring inclusivity for people with disabilities?
That's a great question. I think one of the biggest things is we're realizing that we can all work in a remote world right now. But also, when it is safe to physically go back to the office, there are going to be people with disabilities who want to physically go back to the office. And it's important to keep that open dialogue so people can have the choice. So it's just not assumed that, oh, we don't need to make accommodations in the physical workspace now that everyone who we want to work from home can work from home.
Mhm.
And I think it's continue to seek out ways that won't make people with disabilities feel isolated. So even if you reach out to those employees who you may know and ask if there's anything in addition you can do to support them during these times. And even when it comes to events, making sure, even though we're in a virtual world, putting it out there that you're willing to make an accommodation for them if they need one. Just really intentionally think about supporting employees during these times, but it also ends up it ends up being that you're supporting more people than just those with disabilities. What we are finding is most people who ask for accommodations don't even identify as having a disability. And we're all asking for accommodations right now.
That's the truth. All right. The next question, very direct question, is there anything being done to improve public restroom accessibility for little people?
They have this great thing called the Step and Reach that's in some airports, and it's really helpful because it's a stool that you can put, like, it's built into the floor underneath the sink, and then you can pull it out whenever you choose to use it. And it ends up being helpful for children as well. And I think if we could get more things like that that aren't seen as things in the way, then we're going to be better off, because still people think that a step stool is a liability and that it's going to be in the way and we can't accommodate in that way. And it happens the most to me in hotels. When I go to a hotel, I ask for a step stool and people look at me with five heads and think we don't have that, or we're not allowed to give that to our guests. And it takes a lot of advocating to figure out how I can get a step stool just to access the bed and the sink, because
Mhm.
most hotel rooms have a chair that has wheels that's not going to help me get up on the bed safely. And they also assume that we need an ADA accessible hotel room because nobody's really thinking outside the box. They're like ADA accessible hotel room or standard hotel room. But I rather have a standard hotel room because an ADA accessible hotel room, the counter tends to come up higher because wheelchairs are higher than I stand. And it's just a more comfortable experience to be in a standard room with the step stool.
All right, the next question is pretty much a long thank you from Stephanie Dugan, and just kind of highlighting your story was a reminder of how far we've come and yet how far we need to go. So
Yes, and also saw about the slide. Feel free to share any of the slides and
awesome.
any additional info you may want to share.
Yes.
Thank you, Stephanie.
All right, another thank you about your determination and your parents' courage to challenge the status quo. The next question is, I struggle with correcting people when they use terms like retarded, handicapped, wheelchair bound, etc., even though I cringe when I hear them. Do you have any advice on how to kindly correct people? I don't even know how to kindly correct someone on that. So,
I would say it's like find out what the source was and where, if possible, if it's an appropriate space. Because what I struggle with too is safety. When I try to correct
right.
people, am I then, if I piss them off, am I risking my own safety? And that's why I have to navigate when to educate people. But if there is a teachable moment, I would say, have you heard that terminology from a person with that lived experience, and are they okay with it? And the one of the resources that I had provided is that disability language style guide, even offered to share that because we know uh, those terms are not preferred by most people.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because right early on in your talk, you spoke about how your parents went to follow these signs for birth defects and how
Mhm,
language impacts experience a
mhm.
lot. All right, thank you. All right, from Versiti, Illinois, what words of inspiration would you tell your younger self today?
I would say try not to let other people's opinions of you get in the way of what you're passionate about and going after what you want in life. I think especially during my junior year in high school where I was worrying so much about fitting in with my friends who weren't inviting me places because we were just kind of in that stage of life. I could have just gone out and done what I wanted to do. I was a driver at that point. I could have driven around and found fun things to do, but I know no one wants to do it alone. But I think I learned over time that I'm not going to wait around for people and I'm going to go do what I want to do. And it just allows you to feel more free.
Yeah, there's a sense of freedom in just being who you are and owning that and not trying to kind of get in with anyone else. So,
Yeah.
all right. And then there's just lots of thank yous. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh,
So, so
oh.
any more question or anyone want to raise their hand so I can allow you to ask the question live? Um, please feel free to raise your hand so I can pull you in.
We want to hear from you.
Yes, we want to hear from you. So as people are thinking about this amazing next question that's about to happen, um, oh, okay. Oh, Ron just asked a very impactful question. So he missed the beginning part of the webinar, but wanted to know, did you suffer from depression at some point?
It's so tricky. I guess I say undiagnosed because I never really saw a doctor, but there was one point when I was in an early age of 5 or 6. I told my dad that I didn't want to be a little person anymore. It was after soccer practice. I was really upset that I couldn't keep up with my average type peers in running. And he had some brilliant response of like, you were born this way for a reason. He thought it was going to be the beginning of me asking a million questions like that. But it really got me to be quiet about it after he gave me this brilliant answer about being born this way for a reason. And then I think it was in 11th grade when I was feeling left out from my friends, another sad point in my life, just because I didn't really know if I was going to be able to date in the future or if I was going to be prevented from having a relationship with any of my friends for the next several years because they let that kind of get in the way of our friendship. And then in college, that freshman year, trying to figure out like, how do I just make nice with this person who is afraid of me in my presence and we're roommates. And then in after college, going through that interview process, I think there are just kind of like little sprouts of times where it wasn't easy, but I don't think I ever like went into a dark place. I just I try to be respectful of the terminology of depression because it's such a broad like you could say I was feeling depressed, but maybe I was just feeling down and not the same way that maybe someone else does. But it's tricky. But then after I left California, so the job that I had right before I left California, it was kind of a mutual separation of like time to go. And I moved, and after hearing my friend had been diagnosed with ALS, I was definitely like not happy for a few weeks at least until my sister asked me to come speak at her school. And I also struggled with the idea that I was an adult with a disability living back home with my parents because I thought that was going to be the rest of my life because I just couldn't get out of the funk. And then I think, of course, during these times, it's not fun staring at walls without seeing the outside world. I was at a point where I was on a plane at least once a week, exploring and traveling to different places. But I think for the most part, it's just figuring out how to reflect on maybe how I'm feeling one day, but then get up the next day and try again. And that's kind of that mindset that I can continue to try to have.
Awesome. Well, oh, yes, okay. Another question, as someone who has required accommodations for my speech disfluency, I can relate to many of the things said today, especially involving the fears behind questioning if I'd ever get a job, ever be in a relationship, etc. Thank you for your authenticity today. Awesome.
Aw.
Virtual hugs. We're like virtual hugs all over the place. All right. So, what do you think is the most important thing an employer can do to support their employees with a disability? Also, how to best advertise to the community?
Put it out there. Let us know if you need our assistance. If there's anything we can do to help you feel successful in the job that you're here to do, let us know.
Awesome. Well, that was extremely direct. Okay. And if there are no, I'm just seeing if there's any last questions that come through. I just want to thank you sincerely from the bottom of my heart. This talk was great. You spoke about your experience with dwarfism, but this experience is replicated in so many underrepresented groups. I just appreciate your willingness to share your story and your perspective.
Virtual
Oh,
hugs back.
oh yeah, we just got more virtual hugs. Thank you, Stephanie. All right. So with that, I will figure out how to actually save this recording and I will send it back out to anyone who accepted the invitation as well as you, Becky, so you could share it as you like. And thank you all. Oh, okay. Okay, so one last question, if I can ask this one. How do you tell your boss you have panic attacks?
I would say figure out how it affects your day-to-day job and the responsibilities, and if it's something that was in the requirement of the job that is related to that, you would need to just have an open, honest conversation if you are able to find a level of trust. And if it isn't your boss, maybe there's someone else you can talk to about it first, and
Mhm.
maybe kind of bounce the idea on how to bring it up to your boss. But if it is affecting your performance, it probably needs to be brought up so you can be protected.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, with that, Becky, you've been great. Everyone on the call, we had about 90, 95 people on the call. I know you couldn't see them, but they were there,
I
all
love it.
cheering. All right. Well, thank you. And
Thank
thank you,
you.
everyone. And we'll send this out. All right.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Mhm.